still so many unknowns around this virus.
Not only will America dig itself out of this hole they put us in, we're going to build back, and we're going to build back better.
Good morning. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for The Washington Post, and welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis, all about the Democratic National Convention. Each morning, join me for a live update with a top Washington Post reporter, followed by commentary and analysis from prominent Washington Post columnists and contributors. This morning, we start with White House reporter Ashley Parker. Ashley, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're usually very busy, and you're especially busy now. Let's start with last night's program for the Democratic National Convention. If you could describe the 2-hour show in one word, what would it be?
Americana. Do I get to explain?
Yeah, please.
So I think I, like a lot of people sitting at home, cooped in our house, actually really, and this is not an ideological thing, but really enjoyed that roll call out from in the States, getting to see the country where we haven't been able to travel for the past several months, and frankly, getting to see the people in the country. I feel sort of so starved for human connection, and it was nice to see all of those different people from all across the country and the territories, and it reminded me of everything that's great about America. So Americana.
Americana. And you know, of all the places that we saw, the one that just gave me such, wanderlust and nostalgia for travel was American Samoa. I just throw that out there. So what about the headlines from last night? What stood out for you?
I think Dr. Jill Biden's speech at the end stood out. And so far, you've had the most powerful speeches on the Democratic side have both come from two women, neither of whom are politicians. They've fallen into politics by dint of their partners, Michelle Obama on Monday night, Dr. Jill Biden last night. And then I think from what I've been told, talking to people in the Biden campaign, tonight, Wednesday night, is also going to be packed full of powerful women, of course, culminating with Kamala Harris giving her speech.
Everything about this convention has been new. We've never seen anything like this before. The roll call to me was especially powerful. But one thing that stood out for me last night also was the keynote address. There were something like, how many? 17 people who gave the keynote address. Do you think that is something we could see take hold in future conventions? What'd you make of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think the Democrats have made a real effort to sort of bring in as many people into the fold as possible. Part of that, I think, in some ways is a reflection of what the party is grappling with, trying to throw a little bit of a bone to the progressives and the moderates. And, this is a party that, like the Republicans, probably circa 2010 or so, is kind of struggling with what does it mean to be a Democrat and what would a Joe Biden presidency look like. And I think by bringing in all of those keynote speakers, it was sort of a smorgasbord where you got a flavor of everything. Now, you can argue if that's good or bad, and it's unclear, what would happen in 4 years when hopefully we can all gather in person. But I do think there are going to be some things that we're seeing, and probably on the Republican side too, from these virtual conventions that sort of forced creativity that may be holdovers and go forward, including maybe, for instance, that virtual roll call that really does bring you out into the States instead of a convention hall that feels like it could be anywhere.
One thing that's standing out for me so far after 2 days of this virtual convention are the breakaway speeches, if you will, of regular everyday people. Monday night was Kristen Urquiza talking about her father who passed away of COVID-19. And then last night was Jacqueline Brittany, the New York Times elevator operator, who just both of those stories, different emotional impacts, but they really hit home. What do you make of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kristen on Monday night had one of the most powerful lines saying that her father, who died of coronavirus, who was a Trump supporter, a Trump voter, that his only pre-existing condition was trusting Donald Trump, was a pretty devastating gut punch. And then I think the New York Times elevator operator, Jacqueline, who, officially introduced Joe Biden, was also incredibly powerful. And that, I have to say, and I would urge everyone who is watching, if you haven't read this story, read the story in the Washington Post by Annie Linsky, who interviewed her and got a little bit of that backstory. So when I saw that, I had read Annie's story. I sort of understood the backstory. I understood how powerful it was, that moment that initially went viral that led to this elevator operator, security guard at the New York Times, introducing the former vice president to become nominated as the Democratic nominee. That 1-2 punch, kind of taking them in concert, is really, I think, what made it so powerful. And there was a nice little bit of Annie, a Post colleague, getting a scoop on something that happened at the New York Times with a New York Times employee.
Right. And I know I put you in a difficult position by asking you what you think about a lot of things. So let me have you put your reporter's hat back on. I believe you have some reporting from the Biden camp about what Kamala Harris might say tonight. What you got?
Yeah, they gave me a little bit of a preview. One thing they said is it's not just her, it's the whole program. The speeches leading up to her keynote tonight are going to showcase a lot of powerful women. There's Hillary Clinton who's speaking. There's Speaker Nancy Pelosi who's speaking. There's Gabby Giffords who's speaking. So the first thing is they feel that Kamala's speech should sort of be viewed in this continuum of powerful women, all of whom are going to be showcased this evening. And then also the theme, one of the things they're focusing on this evening is basically when we get past the coronavirus, we can't just get back to where we were. Democrats say we have to do better. We have to do better on the economy. We have to do better on racial injustice. We have to do better on climate change. We have to do better on the broken immigration system. And that those will be some of the themes generally that will be showcased tonight. And Kamala is going to be making the argument of the Biden campaign, the argument we've seen so far these past 2 nights, which is basically a return to decency in the White House, they argue, in the country, and contrasting Joe Biden's leadership, of course, with President Trump's leadership. But they say she'll be making it with her own flair and her own touch. One of the things they're most excited about, and they anticipate she will be the an undercurrent of her speech, is that Joe Biden is going to be trying to do all of this with Kamala as his partner, and a historic partner. If they win, she would be the first female vice president. She's a woman of color, so they think she will touch on her personal story a bit. And again, finally, in making this case, she will do it with her own flair. She's a former prosecutor. She often talks about making the case, prosecuting the case against President Trump. That's something she talked about in that first joint appearance last week with herself and Joe Biden. And so again, they expect her to make the case of the campaign, but in her own unique way, bringing to it her personal story, her history, who she is, where she went to college, and being a former prosecutor.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. We saw a taste of it when in her speech, when she was announced. Ashley Parker, you got to get to work. I know you have a heart out, so thank you very much for starting your day with us on First Look.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
So next up, I'm going to hear from two of my colleagues. I have favorite colleagues. These are two of my favorite colleagues, EJ Dionne and Michele Norris. EJ and Michele, thank you very much for starting your day with me.
Joy to be with you. Thank you.
So Michele, I'm going to start with you to get your impressions of last night. There definitely seemed to be an interest in bridging the generational divide, the Democratic Party old guard, like Senators Kerry or Secretary Kerry, Senator Schumer, former President Bill Clinton spoke. And then you had AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a congresswoman from California, rising star of the progressive left. Again, Michele, I'll start with you. If you had one word to describe night 2, what would it be?
Panoramic.
Oh, I really did. I did ask for one word.
I'm following instructions. Panoramic. You saw the party on display in terms of age and gender and ideology, but I, like Ashley, was just stunned with the beauty of that sea to shining sea roll call. The roll calls always get me, a little emotional at the convention. That's always my favorite part of the convention. And to see the innovation that they brought to this, I too had wanderlust when I was seeing all of these states show their beauty. I thought it was a panorama of race and gender and language. You understand all the different languages that are spoken in this great country of ours. And I think in the end, when you look at the two conventions, when the Republicans finally meet, you will see two very different Americas on display. And that full panorama that I think defines the big tent in the Democratic Party was very much on display in night two.
EJ, Michelle said panoramic. What's your one word?
Well, I'm tempted to say calamari because I think a whole lot of us, including I grew up right on the border of Rhode Island, and I didn't realize how important calamari was to Rhode Island. But I think Americana and panorama are good words. I would go with diverse. I think what was so striking about the way the Democrats not only presented themselves, but presented their states, it was very interesting because it focused on diversity, even in places where, say, East or West Coast people don't think about it. They were very conscious of having First Nation people from some of the states of our union. They had, for a lot of states, a very mixed group of people from different classes and races. I also noted it's not a word that's come up a lot, but there were a lot of union members scattered through there, unions having been historically such an important piece of the Democratic Party. It seems to me that if there is a kind of political thematic that runs through the first 2 days, is Biden is trying to build a very broad coalition, because on the one hand, he has sent a clear message from the very opening of the convention that he doesn't intend to take Black voters, the core of the Democratic Party, for granted. He wants to push back against that. And the whole opening on the racial justice movement, not to mention picking Kamala Harris, sends one really powerful message. But juxtaposed to that is another word, Republican. I think it's also very striking that they are going out of their way to say to Republicans, it's okay, the water's fine, come and join us because we have to have a coalition of the willing against Donald Trump. Thus, Colin Powell's powerful speech last night, that beautiful documentary about Biden's relationship with John McCain, and of course, the four Republicans on night one. I've said that the convention this most reminds me of in some ways is 1964. In 1964, LBJ and his people were trying to say Barry Goldwater is an extremist, well beyond the pale, well beyond reasonable. Join us, reasonable Republicans. This time, they are saying Donald Trump is an abysmal, dangerous failure, a danger to democracy. Please join us to end this. Mm-hmm. And so I get a sense of coalition building going on right before our eyes.
EJ, we have people who are actually watching. And the thing that I just learned is I misspoke. I said Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was from California. She's not from California. Senator Harris is from California. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, is from New York. So I want to correct the record on that. Michelle, we've seen over 2 nights a variety of people. You said panoramic. Ashley said Americana. For me, Monday night was all about Kristen Urquiza. Last night was all about Jacqueline Brittany. Who stood out for you?
I think Jill Biden stood out for me. And not just her words, but that lovely film that introduced her to America. Jill Biden is someone that everyone knows, of course, usually as Joe Biden's +1. Last night, we learned a lot about her. We saw her sisters. We learned a lot about how she blended with that family and really put that family back together. We learned that, her father was Italian and that she was in the military, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why she felt so strongly about supporting military families during her time in the White House. There was a lot of business that was done in the run-up, in the preamble to her actual speech, because the Biden camp knows that the Trump campaign is losing the female vote. Since 2018, college-educated white women in particular have been drifting away from the Republican Party that we see today. And more recently, beginning with the pandemic and really now accelerating in a significant way, non-college educated white women are leaving the party in very large numbers. And the scene with Jill Biden's sisters, all sitting there telling us about what she was like as a kid, that she was tough, that she went and punched a kid in the face because she didn't like the way he was conducting himself. He was a bully and she stood up to him. Again, a lot of business doing there, a lot of business stand up to bullies, since what the party is really trying to do is to remind people that there's a bully in the White House, and that's who they're also trying to remove. There were a lot of things that stood out for me, the opening also, but I think the Jill Biden speech and her opportunity to introduce herself to America was an important moment, and one that really resonated with me.
EJ, in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2012, former President Bill Clinton gave probably the most powerful case for the reelection of President Barack Obama. He went on for what I think is either 45 or 50 minutes. It was a long speech, but it was an effective speech. Last night, 5 minutes. How did the two compare, not just in terms of the timing, but in terms of the content and effectiveness?
The difference was startling, and you're right, Jonathan, to go back to that speech in North Carolina, which was really, it may have been the most effective case for Barack Obama that was made at that convention. I joked at the time that if you like a band, you like them to do the long versions of all their songs, and that's what Bill Clinton gave people back then. I think what you saw last night were two things, and one of our colleagues in the Post pointed this out. Joe Biden is older than Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, and in a way he's outlasted them all. And to have Bill Clinton get only 5 minutes from the party is extraordinary. But even more striking is that the new generation in the party got a lot more time than the old warriors, the old statesmen, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. And again, I think that goes to messages the Democrats are sending. By having that unusual keynote address by 17 people, they were highlighting, again, the diversity within the party, but they were also sending a message to young voters that, Joe Biden may be getting on in years, but we're actually the party of young people. We are the party of new kinds of people entering politics. And so I think you really saw a transition here. And by the way, that was AOC's first moment on a Democratic convention stage. And I think it was interesting because she's being a good soldier. She's endorsing Joe Biden. But it was a sort of last little bit of dissent saying, I'm for Biden, but I still love Bernie and what he stands for. And please don't forget about that.
Right. And it's sort of laying a marker that if indeed the Biden-Harris ticket becomes the Biden-Harris administration, she's going to be right there alongside Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, to hold the Biden-Harris administration not only accountable for what they promise, but to push them to do more, really. Right. Michelle, people are making a lot of the fact that, or actually asking the question, is there too much of the Clintons? Do we need to have both former President Bill Clinton, who spoke last night, and former Secretary of State and the 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton speaking tonight? What do you make of that?
Well, people have been uncomfortable with the dynastic nature of family politics in both the Republican and the Democratic side. And the Democratic side, you of course have the Clintons, and on the Republican side, you have the Bushes, with some younger Bushes, waiting to take their turn on the national stage. I can't imagine how you would disinvite the Clintons because they are so important to the party. He is a former president. He did deserve his time on the stage. I, like EJ, am amazed at the economy of words with which he spoke, because Bill Clinton is known to go on for a very long time. We remember he first spoke in 1984 to introduce Geraldine Ferraro, and then 4 years later came back to speak, and he spoke so long that you remember at the end when he said, "And in closing," it wound up being,
and everyone applauded.
Yes. So it was amazing that he was able to keep it tight this time. But Hillary Clinton, I think, is important also because the ghost of Hillary Clinton and the 2016 campaign still hovers over the party in an important way. And there are a lot of people who are who still have some umbrage about how that campaign was handled, but there are also a lot of people who are real Hillary Clinton believers, and she represented something. She represented someone who was butting her forehead up against that glass ceiling. And so for women voters who saw in her their own ambition, it is important that she too be on that stage, and that the Republicans, the Democrats in showing and demonstrating in important ways that they really are a big tent party, that they're not leaving people behind, that they are embracing everyone in their party, including those who were not victorious, who still have an important role to play. And Hillary Clinton, standing on the sidelines, has been using the platform available to her in a really interesting way. I mean, if you watch her social media presence, her Twitter game has really elevated in the last 6 months. So she has important things to say, and I think she's figuring out also her place in the party in terms of messaging and rallying the troops.
I'm going to ask this question of both of you, but I'm going to get you to keep talking, Michelle. Tonight, we're going to hear from both the vice presidential nominees, Senator Kamala Harris, and also former President Barack Obama. But focusing in on Senator Harris, what are you expecting to hear from her tonight?
She's a fantastic orator. She knows how to give a good speech. She knows how to rally a hall. So I am expecting quite a bit of excitement. But I think we might see her shift down into sort of lower tones this evening to help tell a story of America. She, I'm told, is one of the people who will help not just define the ticket, but also define the message for the party, what the Democratic Party stands for. So I think we're going to probably hear her talk about her very interesting, very diverse, and very American background. As someone who is biracial, as someone who is in a blended family, as someone who went to an HBCU, you're probably, if one of the things I regret a lot of things about not being in the room, but one of the things that I really wish we could have heard is the ski-wheeze that would have come up when she talked about her HBCU background.
Wait, Michelle, you can't just say ski-wee. For the folks who don't know what that is, you got to do it. So do it.
So, but I'm afraid that we might blow out the audio if I do it right now. But imagine a convention hall of women doing this all at once. Remember when she was talking to you, the people, when you did your book talk,
yes, at George Washington, yes.
And people didn't know what it was. They thought they were squealing or they couldn't interpret it. But actually, it is a expression of joy and pride and solidarity. So she will probably create something akin to that with people in their living rooms doing the same thing. But one of the things that the vice presidential candidate usually does is also define the ticket and the message that the administration hopes to send to voters in terms of what their agenda is. And I think that that's important. And again, reaching to recent polling that tells us that the one area where the Biden-Harris ticket is trailing Donald Trump is on the economy. And we are living in a period of great economic tumult. And I think that as we round the corner into night 3 and then move into night 4, I think they're going to be talking a lot more about policy, a lot more about the Democratic agenda. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about the economy and the importance of that issue.
EJ, what do you make of that? And also, what are you expecting to hear from former President Barack Obama?
Well, first, if I could underscore something Michelle said earlier about the Clintons, it would have come as ill grace for a party celebrating the role of women not to invite the woman who was the first woman nominated by a major party. And as for Bill Clinton, he always knows how to talk to swing voters. And I think that Clinton speech that he gave, short though it was aimed straight at the swing voter. But in Hillary in particular, there was just no way. They would have made it more of a story not to invite Hillary Clinton, I think. Tonight, I think that in a funny way, the vice president is usually seen as, to use a Kamala Harris term, the prosecutor of the case against the other side. I think you're going to hear some of that, but I think this convention itself is doing such a good job of that. Kamala Harris's first job will be to show Americans that she is a very plausible president. Something that the Biden team was very aware of, which is that given Biden's age, this pick had to be someone whom Americans would see, whether they agreed with the ticket or not, somebody they could see as a plausible president of the United States. And so I think that is part of her job tonight. And I also think she is, as Michelle suggested, going to talk a lot about economics, because that is the one area where Trump clings to an advantage. I'm tempted just to say Barack Obama's job is to be at least 3/4 of as good as his wife was, because I think his wife set up one heck of a challenge for him, because that was such an effective speech. And it was effective in part because there was no crowd, so that the intimacy created by that screen was very effective for her. I think Barack Obama's job is to say what a great guy Joe Biden was and how he is ready to lead. And he knows that because he watched him for 8 years. And I suspect we're going to hear a lot of that.
Michelle, unwittingly, EJ gave you a great shout out and a great reason for me to get you to amplify what he just said and amplify the column that you have in today's Washington Post about Michelle Obama's speech. What made it so powerful to you?
Could I just say about Michelle, that was a poetic analysis of the words, "It is what it is." That was a beautiful thing.
I mean, there were several reasons that I thought that speech was powerful. Part of it was the speech itself, the words, which she worked quite a bit on. Part of it was the delivery. As I noted in the column, she was writing, the words were precise and they stung, and they were meant to sting. But she sort of rode below the note in her delivery. So it was sort of a quiet fire in her delivery, and she was smiling, and she was very gregarious, but also serious and somber. And part of it was that tone. And then part of it was the setting. She was in a setting that made it look like you could see yourself in that setting. It looked like she was in a den. And because of that, it felt like you were on the other end of a coffee table or a kitchen table having a conversation with her. And there were several lines in there that I think might have been not lost, but diminished somewhat if we were in a convention hall and people were yelling and clapping and screaming, and they had those taffy stick signs that you see every year in the convention that would have her name spelled out. The line, "It is what it is," for instance. Wow. Taking Donald Trump's own words and then turning that around to underscore a point where she made, she named him, which she often does not do. She said his name, said that he is not fit, said that he is over his head, made the case as a prosecutor almost. She went to law school as well, as a lawyer as well, and then just said, "It is what it is." In a convention hall, that would have been a more moment of roaring and cheering. Without that, you're in your home, she's in a home-like setting, and you're hearing that, and in that sense, the words just hung out in the air with savage clarity so that you could fully understand and really embrace that in a different way. It resonated because of the setting. And I think going forward, when we're finally on the other side of this pandemic, however long that takes, there are innovations that have been introduced that may stay with us. And listening to someone who has something important to say without the pageantry is something that we may think about going forward. That was a very important and impactful way to open the convention and to make the case about not just elevating Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but also making the case to prosecute and remove the current man in the White House.
If you have not read Michelle's piece in the Washington Post today, please get it, because she opens with a very powerful statement about the former First Lady dealing with the quote angry Black woman stereotype, and then broadens it out to show how women in general, how they have to modulate themselves in the workplace just to be heard. It was a powerful opening to a really terrific column. Michelle Narz, yes, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, and what she did is she showed how you can turn that stereotype on its head by saying, don't just focus on the fact of my anger, look at the source of my anger, and then ask, why aren't you angry too?
Michelle Narz, E.J. Dionne, my colleagues at the Washington Post opinion page, thank you very much for coming on today.
Great to be with you both.
And we'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. with Washington Post national political reporter Annie Linsky, who's been traveling the country reporting on the election. She'll join us from Wilmington, Delaware, where Biden will deliver his remarks tomorrow night as the Democratic presidential nominee. We'll also speak with Post columnist Charles Lane and Deputy Editorial Page Editor Ruth Marcus. And many more newsmakers on tap for today, including former presidential candidate Andrew Yang and New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. Go to WashingtonPostLive.com to register for all upcoming programs. In the meantime, enjoy your morning. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Thanks for joining First Look.